Which is the only country in the world to have a shipwreck on its flag? The answer is Bermuda. The Bermuda Triangle, sometimes called the Devil's Triangle, covers some 500,000 square miles of the Atlantic Ocean, and the three corners of the triangle are at Miami, Florida, San Juan, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. Welcome to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we look closely at the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle, the mysterious incidents, the theories surrounding them, and any scientific explanations behind the mystery. The earliest recorded mystery around the Bermuda Triangle dates back to 1492, when Christopher Columbus was attempting to reach Asia via a westward route across the Atlantic. Columbus kept a detailed journal, and according to his notes, as he was crossing this region on September 13, 1492, something peculiar happened to his compass. He observed that as night fell, his compass needles turned a half-point northwest suddenly, and in the morning, they turned somewhat more northwest. He also wrote about observing strange lights, including a flame of fire that appeared to crash onto the sea, and a light resembling a candle that moved up and down in the distance. But it was only in 1964 that the term Bermuda Triangle was coined by Vincent Gaddis in an article where he pointed out that even though the sea distances were relatively short in that area, there were still an unusually high number of disappearances that couldn't be explained by chance alone. A theory that emerged recently was that the Sargasso Sea, which is part of the Bermuda Triangle, could be the culprit in some of the shipwrecks within the Bermuda Triangle. In fact, Columbus too got stranded on the Sargasso Sea due to a lack of wind. For 3 days, while the ship and its sister ships were adrift, they encountered sargassum, which is a type of thick brown seaweed that floats and clumps itself into island-like masses within the ocean. And when the sargassum rots, it produces hydrogen sulfide, which can be hazardous to human health. And at higher concentrations, hydrogen sulfide rapidly causes myocardial infarction, unconsciousness, seizures, acidosis, and death. The crew of the Santa Maria also saw the seaweed and feared that they were about to run aground, or they would become tangled up in the sargassum and subsequently dragged down underneath the ocean. And further corroborating this theory is the fact that several shipwrecks have been discovered underneath clusters of sargassum in the Sargasso Sea. But two of the triangle's greatest mysteries took place almost 600 miles away from the Sargasso Sea. In 1881, a ship called Ellen Austin was on its way to New York from London. After it entered the Bermuda Triangle, it came across another ship which seemed to be drifting aimlessly. The captain of Ellen Austin tried to establish contact with the ship, but after 2 days of no response, decided to board this ship. The ship seemed well packed with shipment, but there was no sign of the crew or any human on board. So the captain of Ellen Austin took control of the ship and placed a crew on board so they could sail together with the Ellen Austin. For 2 days, the two ships sailed together, but then they were caught in a massive storm at sea. Days after the storm, the crew of Ellen Austin realized that the other ship had just gone out of sight. After several days of frantic search, the crew of Ellen Austin were able to spot the other ship through their spyglass, but only to realize that it was once again drifting away aimlessly. Ellen Austin finally caught up with the ship, and the crew immediately boarded the ship to check it out. But once again, no one seemed to be on board. About 36 years later, around the same area, another incident happened, and this time it was US Navy's biggest ship at the time, USS Cyclops. In 1917, when the United States entered World War I, the USS Cyclops became a key naval vessel transporting troops and coal to fuel other ships all over the world. In March 1918, the ship was given a new cargo: tons and tons of dense manganese ore, which is used in steelmaking. The ship left Brazil loaded up with manganese ore and then voyaged to Barbados to resupply for the long journey home to Baltimore. The last known message from the ship simply said, "Weather fair, all well." But as the ship entered the Bermuda Triangle, something went majorly awry, and no one from the ship was ever seen or heard again. The ship vanished without a trace. A couple of years later, Santa Fe magazine described the strangeness of this disappearance. It said, usually a wooden bucket or a cork life preserver identified as belonging to a lost ship is picked up after a wreck. But even this did not happen with the USS Cyclops. According to the Santa Fe magazine, the ship just disappeared, as though some gigantic monster of the sea had grabbed her, men and all, and sent her to the depths of the ocean. And the destruction must have been so sudden that there was a complete absence of any wireless calls for help from the USS Cyclops. A gigantic monster of the sea had grabbed her, men and all, and sent her into the depths of the ocean. Interestingly, this speculation has gained some credibility in recent times. Scientists have started explaining the sudden disappearance of ships like the USS Cyclops on a phenomenon called rogue waves. Rogue waves are steep and tall like walls of water, and they often hit unexpectedly in some areas around the globe. And this is very true for the Bermuda Triangle, where storms can come from all directions, like Mexico, the equator, and the eastern Atlantic. In fact, engineers at the University of Southampton in England tested this theory on a model of the USS Cyclops. And they were able to prove that ships of the size of the USS Cyclops can sink quickly if hit by the rogue waves. The bigger the ship, the bigger the difficulty staying afloat. And this theory gets supplemented by the methane bubbles theory. According to this theory, once methane builds up in the ocean floor, some kind of disturbance can release it into the ocean as one big gust of bubbles. And when this giant gust of bubbles rises to the surface, they break up into tiny bubbles. And these tiny bubbles end up reducing the density of the water, which results in ships sinking all the way to the ocean floor. But the problem with this theory is that ships normally are designed to accommodate for a drop in density of the water. But a really heavy ship with an overloaded cargo could still sink because of these methane bubbles. And that may explain the sinking of the USS Cyclops, which was carrying the 11,000 tons of manganese ore cargo when it disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. But neither sargassum, rogue waves, or the methane bubbles can explain the disappearance of humans twice from the ghost ship that the Ellen Austin encountered in 1881. And the sargassum, rogue waves, and methane bubbles can also not explain the bizarre incident that occurred mid-air over the Bermuda Triangle in December of 1945. On December 5, 1945, 5 US Navy Avenger torpedo bombers, that comprised Flight 19 took off from Fort Lauderdale in Florida. They were on a routine 3-hour training mission. After completing their objective, Flight 19 was scheduled to take them east for an additional 67 miles, then turn north for 73 miles, and then head back to the air station. The 5 torpedo bombers, along with their crew of 14, collectively known as Flight 19, never returned. 2 hours into the flight, the leader of the squadron, who had been flying in the area for more than 6 months, reported that his compass and backup compass had failed and his position was unknown. Eerily, the other planes reported experiencing similar instrument malfunctions. Radio facilities on land were contacted to find location of the lost squadron. But the Flight 19 squadron could not be found. After 2 more hours of confused messages from the flyers, a distorted radio transmission from the squadron leader was heard around 6:20 p.m., calling for his men to prepare to ditch their aircraft simultaneously because of lack of fuel. By this time, several land radar stations had determined that Flight 19 was somewhere north of the Bahamas and east of the Florida coast. At 7:27 p.m., a search and rescue Mariner aircraft took off with a 13-man crew. 3 minutes later, the Mariner aircraft radioed to its home base that its search and rescue mission was underway. The Mariner was never heard from again. This led to one of the largest air and sea searches to that date. Hundreds of ships and aircraft combed thousands of square miles of the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and remote locations within the interior of Florida for these 6 planes and their crew of 27. No trace of the bodies or aircraft was ever found. So from Flight 19, it was clear that the compass readings going off was one of the culprits. And this seemed to be in line with what Christopher Columbus himself had written about the compass readings going off in 1492. So what causes the compass readings to become unreliable in this region? The Earth's magnetic North Pole isn't the same as its geographic North Pole, which means that compasses usually don't point exactly north, which means pilots and mariners are accustomed to accounting for this discrepancy in their compass readings to determine the geographic north. However, along what are known as agonic lines, the magnetic and the geographic north overlap. And one such agonic line runs from Lake Superior through the Gulf of Mexico near the Bermuda Triangle. And there's a theory that pilots and mariners, who are usually accustomed to accounting for a discrepancy in the compass readings, may be making mistakes when very near these agonic lines that lead them astray. But Bermuda, which was formed out of a volcanic eruption, has a very unique lava and subsequently mineral deposits. The surface seems to have an abnormally high content of magnetite, and magnetite is the most magnetic naturally occurring mineral on Earth. Bermuda's volcanic rock is between 18 and 20% magnetite, whereas most soils on Earth only contain between 1 and 5%. And because you have more concentrated magnetite, you have more magnetism. And a large magnetic field can enhance the growth patterns of some wild plants like sargassum. And the high magnetic field could also explain the anomalous behavior of compasses within the Bermuda Triangle. But there is still a lot of debate within the scientific community about the magnetic theory being the real cause of the mysterious disappearances within the Bermuda Triangle. So where do we go from here? Between the wild sargassum, the rogue waves, and the high magnetism, we certainly are unable to explain all the mysterious disappearances within the Bermuda Triangle. So is this the end of the road with respect to explaining the Bermuda Triangle mystery? Well, if only we could find a survivor pilot. A pilot who got entangled within the mysterious anomalies of the Bermuda Triangle but survived, then we could get some clues into the exact happenings that lead to these mysterious disappearances. Well, on December 7, 1970, Bruce Gernon, a certified seaplane flight instructor and a master captain with a Coast Guard license, had a near-death experience flying over the Bermuda Triangle, but survived to share his story and investigate the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon. On December 7, 1970, pilot Bruce Gernon, with his two passengers, his father and a business partner, boarded a Beechcraft Bonanza plane, which is a single-engine aircraft. They took off from Andros Island in the Bahamas and headed northwest for the Florida coast. Bruce had made this trip 8 times before, and it usually took about an hour and a half. Once the flight reached about 11,500 feet, a mysterious cloud appeared. It was massive, and Bruce had no choice but to fly through it. So he concentrated, took a deep breath, and went in. And suddenly, it got dark as night all around the aircraft. Not a single shimmer of sunshine. And this wasn't a storm cloud, since it was not raining. And amidst this pitch-dark environment, suddenly, Bruce saw flashes of white light. The flashes would appear and vanish quickly, like lightning. But Bruce knew that this certainly wasn't lightning. The flashes were so bright, they lit up the whole space around them. For 30 minutes, Bruce continued flying, concentrating, and trying to maintain control of the aircraft through this cloud, which now appeared cylindrical. It seemed 1 mile wide, but there seemed to be no end in sight. A minute later, though, Bruce saw a small glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, so he realized that as long as he stayed put, he would be able to get past it. But all of a sudden, the cloud started getting narrower, wrapping like a vortex. The navigation instrument started malfunctioning, and its needle was spinning on its own counterclockwise. The rest of the electronic instruments, too, started malfunctioning. Bruce tried hard to maintain control of the plane, but it gradually seemed to be getting out of control. But about 20 seconds later, Bruce suddenly burst out of this foggy trap. And for 5 seconds after the plane left the tunnel, Bruce felt weightless. There was a massive sense of relief within the aircraft, and Bruce grabbed his radio and contacted ground control. He wanted to determine his exact location. But when the dispatcher looked at his screen, he was utterly confused. Bruce's plane wasn't on the radar. A few seconds later, though, the dispatcher was able to locate Bruce's aircraft and reported back that he was already in the Miami airspace. Bruce was completely shocked to learn that he was already in the Miami airspace. That just was not possible. As I mentioned earlier, the distance usually took an hour and a half. But this time, it had taken just 47 minutes. And when he landed, just to be doubly sure, Bruce checked the remaining fuel on the aircraft. And sure enough, there was plenty of fuel still left. Between the navigation instrument malfunctioning and streaks of white light, Bruce's experience seemed very much in line with Christopher Columbus's experience in 1492. So Bruce consulted with professors and experts to understand how he skipped almost half the entire distance. Unable to get a definitive answer, Bruce came up with his own theory and wrote 2 books about it. The first one, published in 2005, is called The Fog a never-before-published theory of the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon, and the other, published in 2017, is called Beyond the Bermuda Triangle: True Encounters with Electronic Fog, Missing Aircraft, and Time Warps. Bruce concluded that it all came down to this electric fog with white flashes. Archived records showed that 84 sunspots had been recorded that day, as well as a huge solar wind moving almost 440 miles per second. This would certainly lead to disturbances in the Earth's magnetosphere, and that could throw the plane's instruments and radars off. So Bruce's version of the electric fog could be right. But to this day, there has been no real answer as to how Bruce was able to travel that distance in almost half the time. And on that note, we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. Bizarre but true, Israel once partnered with Iran to hurt a common enemy. When and for what operation did this partnership happen? In 1981, due to the Iran-Iraq war, tensions between Iran and Iraq were high, so Iran, under the Khomeini government, inadvertently played a role in enabling Israel's 1981 bombing of Iraq's Osiris nuclear reactor. So the answer is C, the 1981 bombing of Iraq's Osiris nuclear reactor. Question for the current episode. A massive shipwreck in 1606 at Bermuda is believed to have inspired one of Shakespeare's plays, which referred to Bermuda or Bermudes as a vexed or cursed place. Which play was this? Was it A, The Tempest, B, King Lear, C, The Merchant of Venice, or D, Hamlet? Once again, a massive shipwreck in 1606 at Bermuda is believed to have inspired one of Shakespeare's plays, which referred to Bermuda or Bermudes as a vexed or cursed place. Which play was this? Was it A, The Tempest, B, King Lear, C, The Merchant of Venice, or D, Hamlet? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. We meet again in 2 weeks with another interesting and exciting episode on world history. Till then, stay safe, but keep exploring the why in history.